the need for monsters is something we're going to get to in a minute. But what they represent is a kind of power that we, the normal good person, shies away from, doesn't go near. So monsters represent a whole spectrum of power that the ordinary mortal doesn't have access to or doesn't want access to. So, hi everybody. We're going to do an archetype video today, and this time I am responding to requests. I've been doing this for so long now that people are writing in and saying, please do this archetype, please do this archetype, please do the athlete, please do this. And and I don't get it, but one of the archetypes that I am getting requests for, which surprises me, is the monster. The monster. I mean, so I took a look at this and I thought the monster archetype, all right, I'll go there. And it became a little bit more interesting than I anticipated. So here we go. First thing I want to say about the monster archetype is that it goes back forever. Societies and the worlds, not surprisingly, have had monsters because so much of the evolution of the monster comes from mythic times and times of trying to understand power and nature and the order of nature. And when something falls out of the order of nature, it's usually assigned power that human beings don't normally have. So that if a human being, for example, is born deformed, oftentimes they were in the way back. We're in Viking times and in Druid times, they were set aside to die in the forest because the deformity was seen as something that could be potentially monstrous or a bad omen for the tribe, the group, the population. You have a monster, people, when someone is born that has giantism, like in David and Goliath. So you have Goliath, who becomes a fighter for that David slays with his sling, but he was a, quote, monster because of his strength. Again, having something that was abnormal for the average ordinary human being. And so that could put somebody into the monster category. Because it's not recognized, but I mean, look at in contemporary times, you have Loch Ness, you have Bigfoot, you have what are all these monsters? I actually wrote them down because I can't even remember all of them. But you have the monsters, werewolves, that come from legends and myths of well-forested areas or the deep loch in Loch Ness. I've been to Loch Ness so many times. Well, the first time I went there, this lovely Scottish woman was taking me on a tour of Loch Ness, which is very long and very deep. And I said jokingly, do you think we'll see the monster? And she felt obligated to produce the monster because she was taking me on a tour of Loch Ness. She said, oh, I'm sure it's going to show up. I just be patient. I thought I was hysterical. But the need for monsters is something we're going to get to in a minute. But what they represent is a kind of power that we, the normal good person, shies away from, doesn't go near. So monsters represent a whole spectrum of power that the ordinary mortal doesn't have access to or doesn't want access to. So archetypal monster traits in general are that monsters are considered ugly, or they're malformed, or they can be exceptionally strong, or they can be exceptionally gifted in ways that with destructive skills that human beings don't have. For example, vampires and flying in the form of a bat and changing shapeshifters, changing shape. Werewolf, a shapeshifter, something that ordinary mortals can't do. And I'm just going to hit a pause button here and say that all the, when you look at these legends and these myths of these monster creatures, remember, so many of them come from times when people were not scientifically savvy. And so they had to explain things that are quite like ecologically normal, like earthquakes or great storms or massive thunder and lightning storms. But shy of not having scientific knowledge, they had to credit it to something. So either the gods were angry or there was a monster on the loose. And if a society was destroyed, if lightning and fire struck, well, then maybe the monster had come. And in a particular, if a child had been born who was deformed and brought about a monstrous omen, because the origin of the word, I believe in Latin, means portending of things to come. So it could, what freakish thing happened that could account for a freakish power event, and that would suggest that maybe a monster is near, or a monster's been born into our midst, something like that. This is how people think, and don't think that people don't think this way. Still, they do. There's a superstitious mechanism in people that is stronger. In my experience, it's stronger than the mechanism of faith, is the mechanism of the superstitious mind. And when a superstition or a fear gets hold of someone, it is a possession. It's like being possessed, and you are possessed. You're possessed by this fear, the fear of speaking up, the fear of being empowered. So you cave to a group, like you see with the Republicans. They can't stand up to Trump. They cave, and look what's happening across the country because of it. Speaking of monsters. So the monster, another trait. Let's talk about the different categories of monsters, because this I found absolutely intriguing. The beast. So in this category, we have, Godzilla, we have King Kong, we have aliens, werewolf, that kind of thing. But much to my surprise, and I didn't see this coming, I'm going to introduce a word to you. Teratophilia. Teratophilia, Phila. Phila. It is being sexually attracted to monsters. So here's the story, Beauty and the Beast. She is sexually attracted to monsters. Now, I couldn't let this go. I thought, what? But as I delved into this for this particular video, the many people who've written about this discuss how the relationship between Beauty and the Beast has so much to do with the relationship between the feminine to control the raw masculine, or to inspire the raw masculine to control its baser urges, to destroy or to kill. That is what makes the story so seductive, is that this creature, the beast, found a reason to not be a beast because he fell in love with this woman. The Shape of Water is another story of a woman who falls in love with a, quote, monster, someone nothing like herself. So much to my surprise, there's a whole body of work about the sexual attraction to monster power, maybe we'll call it that, or the dark side, or this need to be absolutely free of all your own darkness in some way. Extraordinary. I'm telling you, I could have just carried on about this in researching it. The hours were passing as I was reading this, because I promise you, this is not a area that I have ever looked into. So, um, dragons are other monsters that, and then you have the love story between vampires and humans that was illustrated in a series called Twilight, and um, this massive romance that happens between the male vampire and then the female, who was not a vampire but ends up one. And what's so astonishing, it's so astonishing to me, is that the vampire archetypally has really dark roots. And its whole mythology is that it sucks the life out of you, and that it goes for your fifth chakra. It bites your neck. It sucks the life out of you. And this is your will. This is your power to protect yourself. So the last thing you would want is a vampiric romance. And yet that 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 novels, I think there's several of them, and that series managed to initiate an idea that the vampire was romantic, and that being vampiric, being monstrous, had a romantic quality. And in researching this, I found that during that post twilight, during that twilight phenomenon and post traumatic, there were people who actually identified themselves as vampires and decided they needed human blood. I mean, this is how crazy it got. This is how crazy we can get, right? Another category of monsters is the intelligent monster, and that's often portrayed by, for example, clever vampires like Dracula and the story of Count Dracula. I don't know how many of you have actually read the actual Bram Stoker's book, Dracula. It is absolutely fabulous. And and the character Count, the actual Count Dracula, was is a very intelligent man. So you have intelligent monsters. You have aliens that are looked upon as very intelligent beings that look monstrous to us. That doesn't mean, there is that one movie, District 9, which I thought was actually quite something, because the aliens looked monstrous, but the real monsters were the humans. So the aliens were incredibly brilliant, compassionate beings, but because we didn't like their form, they were imprisoned in this horrible, filthy camp. If you can see the movie, watch it, because it does make you wonder who the monsters are. Then there's madmen, which is another category of monster, and in that we'll put something like Hannibal Lecter from The Silence of the Lambs. People who psychopaths. But what makes the psychopath? What makes the monster? What qualifies someone to be called a monster? Is the absence of conscience, the complete disassociation with any characteristics, anything within them that is remotely human or humane. When you think of all the horrible tortures that go on, that went on, for example, in the concentration camps. So when you think of people who beat other people up for a living, or the times when I've read stories about gladiator stuff going on in our prison system, and all of this monstrous, and that is monstrous, where human beings no longer have access to their humanity, and they cross that line and they go into the monster category. they go into the monster category. Um, they have no moral conscience, none whatsoever. I remember seeing that movie about Al Capone. Al Capone's buried near where I live, and of course he was from this area. But there was a movie in which he meets with his soldiers, or what were they called? I don't remember. But he kills one of them with a baseball bat, just beats his head in, and doesn't think twice. When a value system reaches a place, here's another example. I just watched a series called The New Look, which is brilliant. It's the story, it begins in World War II with Coco Chanel and Christian Dior. And it really portrays Coco Chanel, apparently a chapter in her life in which, for the sake of her business, she negotiated with the Nazis. And so she was, toward the end of the film, she's brought back to France for trial for having worked with the Nazis. But you see it along the way that again and again and again, her humanity evaporates for the sake of greed. And one of the characteristics, as I was reading about monsters, is that when it comes down to human beings being monsters, it's their greed that's out of control. It's their need for money. Their need for money that makes them absolutely crazy, that makes them monstrous, that anything they can do to have their money is okay with them. And in her case, whether it was working with the Nazis while her fellow Frenchman in her country was being brutalized, didn't bother her because it was about her money. And so it brought out the monster in her. Okay. Then there's another category of people who are declared monsters because of the package they come in. Like, for example, the Elephant Man. If you remember that story about a man who lived, I think, in the late 1800s, I believe he was British. And unfortunately, I don't remember the name of the illness he had, but his head was larger than life. It's such a tragic story. I find these stories very, very, very hard to watch because they're true. And so when people are so incredibly deformed, they oftentimes have no alternative economically but to showcase their deformities in what was called a freak show. And I mean, how tragic is that? And to have people come and look at you and laugh at you or scream or yell or whatever, and any possibility of a normal life, but they think of these people as monsters. Another one was Frankenstein. Remember when Mary Shelley wrote that? I mean, her idea was to have this compassionate being, that because he was so ugly, he was treated as he looked. But another one is Quasimodo from The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Quasimodo was, I believe it was deaf and partly blind, and he was a hunchback. And of course, for that reason, he was, treated as a kind of the pet monster of Notre Dame. He rang the bell. And when what people do is they avoid people who are deformed, and here comes the superstitious factor, thinking that if you come anywhere near me, whatever it is you're carrying could transfer into my family genetic pool, psychically, however, whatever. I'm just better off staying away from you. And so we push these people away from us, thinking that it's a monster. And I think in a way that is partially what happened when the AIDS epidemic surfaced. Before we knew anything about AIDS, AIDS became the disease of the monster. And so people with AIDS were shunned. I mean, remember the movie Philadelphia? I think it's Philadelphia, Tom Hanks. He did that brilliant performance. as a gay man who develops HIV until people learned how it was passed on and et cetera, et cetera. But people who had HIV were treated as though they were monsters. There was a bit of that. And let me just say, I mean, obviously, when you don't know how an epidemic's spreading, you don't want to be around it because you're not sure. But again, this is part two, everybody. I was saying that the level of hostility and fear that the HIV generated in us was rooted half in fear and much in superstition. Much in superstition. So now I want to tell you another part that I thought is that I was reminded of while looking at this monster archetype and this fascination we have with dark power and dark authority. When I was in publishing many decades, 5, I don't remember, decades ago, during the 80s, it was during that time that several parents, because we were publishing spiritual books, and that so many, excuse me, that so many parents would say to us, why don't you do a line of books on spirituality for children? Which totally made sense to us. So, and getting a whole line of books going, getting authors, getting illustrators, it's an endeavor. So we actually decided to invest money and resources into opening up a children's division, and we called it Angel Food. And you know what? Those books didn't sell. These wonderful stories about angels and guides and children and how they're watched over by heaven at night and all kinds of things. I remember doing one of the books was on Care Bears and how an animated teddy bears and then every year there was a book fair, big huge book fair, international, all the booksellers and the publishers, and they all got together to show the new list that was coming out that fall. And that particular year, I spent a lot of time in the children's division. And you know what? Like Maurice Sendak, if you know his books, the majority of books, and particular Sandak's books, were winning awards, and they were all on monsters. They were all on monsters. And they were all these frightening stories of kids being frightened and then saved at night and this kind of thing. And I thought, this is exactly what parents said they didn't want, but this is what they were buying. This is what they were buying. And in fact, the books the parents said they wanted, they weren't buying. Stories about angels and guidance and how prayers are answered and that the kids are never alone and they're always watched over. That didn't sell. And that shocked me. I mean, I'm telling you, here it is decades later. I still can't get over it. And I looked at children's books just online, just before this workshop. And there's a book called The Morals of Monsters by Leslie Ormandy, Ormandy. I can't even read my own handwriting. Leslie Ormandy. And the whole theme of this is that this child apparently has very obnoxious behavioral patterns. So these monsters that he's imitating show up to teach him some morals. Okay, fair enough. But I mean, why would he need monsters to do that instead of mentors or an older brother figure or an older sister figure? But no, right? Monsters. Here's another one. Oh no, I mixed that up. I'm sorry. The Morals of Monsters. This one is about how people who can look different are still as nice as you. And then Monsters Have Manners is the one in which this rambunctious kid is taught manners by a bunch of monsters that visit him at night. Now, I don't know about you, but I mean, if I'm not a parent. I don't know what I would want to expose my child to, but I do know, I deeply believe, knowing who I am, knowing that I've taught and instructed my nieces and nephews since they were in diapers, that I've never used monsters as a role model or a way to illustrate our finer points. I have used angels many, many, many times, but not monsters. And I find it fascinating that, as I said, way back when angel food didn't sell, and today still monsters are popular. So there's something in us. There really is something in us that finds the monster archetype incredibly intriguing. That there's something about that sort of power that fascinates us. And I'll throw this out. I have nothing to base this on but a hunch. And that I think being a conscious, good person is a lot of work. It takes a lot of effort. It doesn't take effort to be a monster, because what that is that you're finally deciding that all the rules that goodness requires, that conscience requires, that consideration of others requires, you don't have to pay any attention to those at all. You don't have to pay any attention whatsoever. And I think we are all born knowing what a sin is. And I don't use I'm not speaking Catholic to you. I am speaking soul to you. And by that I mean that when we use our conscious power of choice to make a choice that we know is based on a lie, or that we know someone else is going to suffer because of what we've just chosen, or that someone else is going to be blamed because of what we've just done. When we do that, there's a part of us that knows we have violated something truly awful. We could call it our conscience, but it's bigger than that. We have used our life force to harm the life force of another person. And I think that that is one of the great cosmic no-nos. The conscious use of our power of choice to destroy in any way or harm any way the life of another person. And it takes a lot of effort which is why becoming conscious is so rigorous. Because as you become more conscious, you become more aware that every choice packs a punch. Every word packs a punch. And you don't want to live that high. And a monster doesn't have to. What a monster gets to do is disregard every one of the rules that makes us human, that makes a society function, that makes a society cohesive. You don't have to tell the truth. You don't have to be considerate. You don't have to be any of those things. You don't have to do anything right. You can steal, you can use greed, you can destroy the life of another because it's what you want. Because it's what you want. You can make up things like Fox News. You could say whatever you want. Endless lies pouring out of you. It doesn't matter because you've turned off your conscience. You've turned off your conscience. So you just breathe and speak monster fluently. And I think there's something that's sinisterly attractive in us that we have to battle about that, because that level of dark liberation, it's not light liberation. It's not empowered liberation. It's how the dark liberates you. It's how the dark liberates you. And it can feel empowered, but it in fact becomes imprisoned. It's actually a prison because you can't get out once you're in. You actually can't. You are imprisoned by the dark. I think that's why we try to imprison monsters. Look at them. But the goodness in us always wants to believe we can defeat them. Okay, thank you, everybody. This was something. Okay, thank you all.